So my name's Andy Jaw, and I'm a senior technical specialist with Microsoft in security. And today I'm going to talk about passwordless authentication and its impact on security. So the goal is to try to make passwordless authentication an everyday part of life where for the normal users, they're not really ever entering in their passwords. I work with mostly enterprise customers, so usually large customers who have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft already. But of course, some of these concepts will apply to small businesses as well as your personal accounts. So if you're using a Microsoft account with like your Xbox Live or your personal Windows computers, there's accounts that you can use passwordless authentication with that as well. A lot of reasons why we want to get rid of passwords. I think most of us agree that they are terrible. They're hard to remember. We need vaults, and because of the vulnerabilities with passwords, we've added mitigations like MFA, which are also not as good. The way that we think about passwords, there's often anti-patterns to them. So when we type a password, if it's something that we have to remember, it's always going to be something that is similar to how we write languages. So like a sentence. So you're always going to put the capital letter at the beginning. Generally, for most users, they're going to type a bunch of lowercase letters, a number, and then our punctuation or exclamation mark is always going to be at the end. And that's an anti-pattern for most passwords. And I'm generalizing because obviously if we're surrounded by security professionals here, you're probably like, I use a totally random password, I put it in a password vault. But you got to think like the majority of users are going to set something that they're going to try to remember, and that's going to be the way that they scope it out. If you are using vaults, that's also kind of another mitigation because, again, passwords is the problem, and vaults is really not a solution. It's just another mitigation that we have developed to try to store all of these things. And now we're putting all of our eggs in one basket, which is probably okay, but if you've been following the news, have been breaches to vaults, and as security professionals, we also don't feel great about vaults, right? Like we put all of our passwords in these vaults, and it's, again, if you breach the one thing, the keys to the kingdom, then of course they have everything. So not something that, again, we would like to get rid of, which is why moving to passwordless is a better solution. Like I said, nobody likes passwords. These are some of the stats. Some of them are a little bit old, but I'll point out the one at the bottom here, which is just the increasing number and frequency of attacks on passwords. When this presentation was first made, it was about 500 per second, which was about 2021. In 2022, the number was pulled from the Microsoft Defense Report, and that was around 700, which was about a 90%, 80% increase. And then just recently, Microsoft Secure happened this last week on Tuesday, and the number was 1,247 password attacks per second. So just continuing to increase because it's automated and things are a lot easy to just spam a password, and a lot of stolen passwords these days. So continuing to increase, so another reason why. 2FA, MFA, again, nobody really likes these either. Users don't like them, they're a pain. Again, it's a mitigation against the problem, which is a password. So we would like to probably get rid of MFA if at all possible. But because it's a necessity right now, we can't. So a lot of different ways that you can implement passwordless authentication. So I'll go through a couple of them. I won't do a huge deep dive, but if you do have questions on how this stuff is implemented or more technical things, happy to talk with you. I'll have my contact information in the presentation, as well as we'll give some chances for questions at the end here. For Windows, there's Windows Hello for Business, which is different than Windows Hello, which is the consumer version of passwordless authentication. And that's okay, but Windows Hello for Business is an enterprise solution which has asymmetric cryptography backing it. And then the Microsoft Authenticator, there's other IDPs out there that also have passwordless integrated with their solutions. Like I used to be an Okta admin, and so Okta does also have passwordless authentication that you can do. And then of course FIDO2 security keys, which is a stronger form, phish-resistant, and kind of all the rage these days because of the different MFA attacks that have been happening, like MFA bombing, or some even the evil jinx attacks, which are a little bit more trivial, that have been around for a while, but there are attacks against MFA, which is the point. And so FIDO2 being a physical security key that you have to have, if I'm asked to put in, if someone calls me up and says, hey, I need your 6-digit code, you can't give it to them because it's a physical key. So Microsoft has some documentation on how to implement password strategy. And the first thing is just to deploy them, like Windows Hello for Business or FIDO or the Microsoft Authenticator. So get them out there, configure them, test them in a pilot group if needed, and then move to reduce password visibility, which is essentially, from a user standpoint, never having to enter in a password. So my daily work at Microsoft, when I turn on my computer, I sign in with Windows Hello for Business. The device is Azure AD joined, but this will work with a hybrid Azure AD joined device as well. And when I launch my browser, it'll single sign into my applications that are Azure AD federated. And then if I have to sign into a browser that's not federated, or let's say it's in private mode, and I have to authenticate, it'll then prompt the Microsoft Authenticator for me to enter in a number rather than a password. I never enter in a password, and I cannot remember the last time that I've entered in a password. Probably the only time that I've entered it in is 2 years ago when I set the password when I got hired. So that's the goal, is to deploy the solutions and then slowly start to remove the visibility where the password is no longer really a part. You may still have a password set within the AD object if you're on-prem and you're using Active Directory services, but for all intents and purposes, it doesn't exist to the user because they've never used it. There is the fourth one, which is kind of like the, let's aspire to get there, which is eliminate passwords completely. The only solution out there today where you can actually just eliminate a password completely from the identity is your Microsoft consumer account. So if you don't know, Microsoft, or your MSA, I should say, you can go in and actually just remove the password completely. And that just means that literally on the identity side for my andy.jaw@outlook.com, I don't have a password. So when I sign into my computer, it doesn't even give me an option to enter in a password on the Windows sign-in screen. If you're familiar with the Windows sign-in screen, it has different sign-in options. Password is not one of them because I've signed into that machine. It's mine associated with the Outlook account, and I don't have a password with it. So that's kind of the fourth one. Enterprise solutions aren't quite there yet. I think that will come, but the majority of enterprises are in a hybrid state from the customers that I talk to. Most of them have an on-prem identity like Active Directory, and then they sync that to the cloud. And so from there, you just want to use more of the enterprise passwordless authentication stuff. So Windows Hello for Business specifically is, number one, two-factor authentication. It uses asymmetric keys in order to pair and authenticate. It can be deployed in multiple different ways, fully on cloud, hybrid, or on-prem. And it can be used with multiple accounts. Now, there is a limitation, if you're not aware, for like a shared kiosk machine. the limitation of the TPM can only store authentications for 10 accounts. So if you're in, like, say, for manufacturing, my customers that I talk to quite a bit, they have kiosk machines or shared machines on the manufacturing floor. If you're using Windows Hello for Business, you've got to keep in mind, number one, you have to register that every time a new user signs in. So the first time they sign in, they have to register the Windows Hello for Business, either PIN or biometric. But it's limited to 10 total who can sign into that machine, or you have to start deleting the old biometric data from the machine and then re-register new ones. The better way to do that, if you're in a shared environment, is to use FIDO2 keys. So that, whether it's a USB or what I found that works really, really well that's available today are like NFC cards. So you can use like an NFC. A lot of people have access controls to get into the building. You can use the same NFC card to get into the building and then also authenticate to your machine. Privacy concerns come up quite a bit. The Windows biometric data that is used for Windows Hello for Business never leaves that machine. It's never shared. It's never taken to a different server. It's local to the machine. And the biometrics creates a data file that's kind of like for layman's terms, we'll just say it's like a hash, right? It is one way. It is not reversible. So if I had the biometric data file, which you can see right here, you can navigate to it, I can't reverse that for your biometrics. And it doesn't take like a fingerprint, it takes like a pattern, then creates the data file from it so that it's used for the unlocking of the machine. And here's kind of another graphic to kind of show you it is one way. So it uses the biometric data to create an ID. That ID is then used to unlock the device. If I have the file, I cannot just reverse engineer it back. So I wanted to talk about PIN versus password just for a few minutes because this often comes up. Windows Hello for Business has, like when I talk to customers, they're like, well, all of our computers don't have an infrared camera or we don't have a fingerprint reader. You can implement Windows Hello for Business with a PIN, and it works perfectly well. And there's a reason why PIN is better than password. So if I have your password, that is transmitted over the wire, and I can then authenticate to your user. If I had your user ID, I can authenticate to services using that username and password. If I have your PIN, I only have your PIN for the device that you have Windows Hello for Business enrolled on. So think about it from this is a very easy way to think about it and explain it. If you have to pitch this to someone, like let's say you're pitching, like I want to enroll everyone in the company, boss, CISO, whoever it is. Think about it from your phone standpoint. If I had your Google account, username and password, let's assume you don't have MFA. I can then sign into a lot of things. I can access your Gmail. But if I had your PIN to your phone, I have to have your phone, right? If I had your username and password, I could go anywhere and sign into stuff. But if I had your PIN to your phone, I have to have your phone in order to sign in, right? Same thing with Apple. If you had the PIN to my phone, you have to have my phone in order to authenticate. But if you had my iCloud password, assume I don't have MFA enabled, then you can sign into a lot of things. Same thing here, same concept, right? If I have a PIN, it's local to the device. You can set the same PIN on all the different things, right? Obviously. If I have two different iPhones, I can set the same PIN or I can set different PINs. They're still authenticated to me. But yeah, enrolling Windows Hello for Business, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but even with a PIN, it's still very, very good. And users appreciate it because your password requirement is probably like 12 characters, alphanumeric, all that stuff. PIN, it doesn't follow the same risk profile because it's local to the device, so don't apply the same rules that you would for password rotation. If you're still using password rotation, PIN should be a lower risk factor because it's local to the device. At Microsoft, just as an example, we use minimum 6-digit PIN non-expiring. So it has to be 6 digits at least. Mine are usually longer, but it just has to be 6 digits, never expires, can be the same one on multiple devices. And of course, you can see here, like Windows Hello, it does create a pin, which is like on a, like let's say Windows 10 or 11 home machine, which is a convenience pin. It still stores the username and password, and then it releases that when you use the convenience pin, versus Windows Hello for Business, which uses key-based or certificate-based authentication on the back end, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah, I talked through this slide already, so if you want to take a picture or whatever, go ahead. But yeah, PIN is better than a password, even if you don't have biometric devices on your machine in order to authenticate via your face or fingerprint. Still implement it because users will appreciate it. Okay, we'll talk about deployment models real quick for Windows Hello for Business. There are 6 deployment models total today. 4 of them are kind of redundant, and I won't touch on 2 of them. So there are 2 that are key trust and certificate trust that are like domain key trust and domain certificate trust, and then hybrid key trust and hybrid certificate trust. They're mainly the same, with the exception of the ones that are domain. It's if you're only on-prem completely. So you have Active Directory joined machines, you're using Exchange on-prem, you're using SharePoint on-prem, you have no O365 presence. There are very, very little customers who are like that today, so if you are, you're within the minority. So hybrid key trust and hybrid certificate trust are more common. There are positives and negatives to both of them, but certificate trust requires you to have at least 2012 domain controllers, and you have to have a robust PKI infrastructure, issuing user certificates. So if you have someone who knows PKI and you're issuing user certificates, you can have those certificates be the key to then authenticate against AD, against on-prem AD, in order to unlock the machines with Windows Hello for Business. Key trust is a little bit easier. You still need to have PKI services, but you don't need to issue out user certificates. So the key is then escrowed within the domain controllers, and the domain controllers do the authentication against the key, and you have to have 2016 domain controllers in order to support this. So if you are using key trust, you want to validate how many authentications you're probably going to have, and you need to have enough 2016 domain controllers to support all of those authentications. There's really no like main difference, but one use case for certificate trust that still remains is if you want to use passwordless authentication to authenticate to RDP for servers. And if you're going to do that, it has to be certificate trust. It won't work with key trust. So if that's a use case that you're looking for, you're going to need to go with certificate trust. But for user computers, you can do either one. And this is for hybrid solutions. There's other ones, which is key trust, and this is obviously the easiest one. This is if you're using Azure AD joined devices, and you're just authenticating against Azure AD. Super easy to do. If you're using Intune, there's like a checkbox. You just say, turn on Windows Hello for Business, and it will do the enrollment and then escrow the key within the user object in Azure AD, and you never have to talk to on-prem. So it just does the exchange with the cloud. You just have to have internet access, right? There's no on-prem infrastructure required. Hybrid key trust, like I said, does require, hybrid cloud key trust is the newest model that is out today, and it greatly simplifies hybrid key trust deployment. So instead of using your on-prem domain controllers in order to do this, you have to enable Azure AD Kerberos. And so the Kerberos object in Azure AD will then do like a TGT exchange with the on-prem domain controllers. The simplification comes in the fact that you have to enroll it on-prem first, so this is a hybrid deployment still, so the initial enrollment still has to have line of sight to the domain controller, but after that, you never have to talk to the domain controller again. It uses the Azure AD Kerberos object, which has to have an object within AD on-prem to then do the authentication. So, and it's super easy to deploy. You just need a couple of PowerShell. Obviously, you need to be a domain admin and a global admin, but once you have that, it's like a PowerShell command to deploy the Azure AD Kerberos object. The users, you still have to deploy the policy, whether it's within Intune or group policy, and then after that, the user, after they enroll, they just never have to be on VPN or be on-prem in order to authenticate, which is different than the hybrid deployments. So hybrid key trust and hybrid certificate trust, like I said, there is infrastructure on-prem. It does communicate with the on-prem domain controllers, and so, take that as you will. All right, Microsoft Authenticator. This is also the MFA. It now can also be used for multi-accounts. So previously, the password authentication, the passwordless authentication where you had to register your phone for the phone sign-in was only scoped for one account, one corporation. Now it can be multiple ones. It's pretty easy to implement, and in order to have passwordless authentication, you have to go to the authentication methods, drop that down to any or passwordless. If it's on push, it won't be passwordless. It'll require the user to enter in their password first and then prompt for a push on the authenticator. With passwordless, they don't have to do that. There have been some improvements as well. These are all generally available now. So you can use number matching, you can show the application name and the geographic location. So previously, I think when it first came out, it was just the prompt of approve or disapprove. Then it went to 3 numbers, as you saw on the previous slide, which technically still had the 1 in 3 chance of someone like MFA bombing selecting the right one. Now you have to enter in a number between, I think it's 1 in 99, so it's a smaller chance of actually guessing the right number. And that's just like with all the MFA bombings, people are getting all these different prompts. You can then see what application I signed into, where the egress IP is coming from, and then entering in a number. So it's just more context for the user. So FIDO2 security keys, instead of escrowing the key within the TPM, let's say for like authenticating to Windows, which is one way that you can implement FIDO2 keys. It escrows it within the FIDO2 USB device or NFC device or whatever it is. So you just need that to authenticate to the machine. You can also use, not to be confused with other passwordless, but you can also use the security keys in order to authenticate to Azure Active Directory federated applications or other IDPs, right? So like if it's Okta or whatever, you can use a FIDO2 to authenticate to those applications, which is different than authenticating to the machine, but you can do both with FIDO2. But also, Windows Hello for Business is also certified as FIDO2, so you could just use Windows Hello for Business without the FIDO2 key if you're like in compliance or whatever and you need to pass an audit, it counts as FIDO2. And it counts as MFA, because it's something you have, which is the device, and something that you are or know, which is the PIN or your biometric. So again, for those audit folks who need to pass, yeah. All right, a lot of different ways to do it. Like I said, there's some USB keys which require just like a touch. Some of them require a biometric. If they require a touch, they'll have a PIN associated with them. So again, there's always going to be some sort of authentication required, even for the NFC USB keys. Another way that you can do passwordless is you can, because Windows Hello for Business is a FIDO2 method, you can use the TPM in Windows Hello for Business as the FIDO2 security key for Azure Active Directory federated apps. So the way that works is instead of inserting a USB, I authenticate to Windows Hello for Business, and that counts as the FIDO2 authentication. Authentication strengths, still in preview today. Again, this is born out of all of the different MFA attacks that we've had. So you can use conditional access to specify the level of multi-factor authentication that is going to be required. So if you have admins and you want to force a FIDO2, or you want to make sure that users are enrolled in passwordless authentication, you can then scope this as a conditional access for accessing a certain application or all of the applications if you want. And here's a screenshot showing you of the policy. So if you're requiring authentication strength, which is the condition, or you could just do multi-factor authentication. Okay, so some of the benefits, I call it a security unicorn. Passwordless is a security unicorn because it's one of those few things that we do as security practitioners that not only makes it more secure, but it's also a better experience for the user, right? Like most of the time when you talk to users about implementing something security, they're like, oh man, like what am I gonna have to do now? But this is a better experience and most people appreciate it, especially the executives. I've deployed this at many companies and every single time it's the executives who come up to me and like, this is the best experience I've ever had and how do we do this for everyone in the company? So, of course, like if you don't have a password or you're never using it or you don't know it, you can just set something super long and just forget about it. And it can't, you know, for a user, if I'm never using my password, I'm never going to be phished for it. I'm never going to, it's, you know, it's really hard to brute force that stuff because you just set something super long. Like I said, it counts as MFA for Windows Hello for Business because it is something that you have, which is local to the device and something you are or know. Cost effective, something that doesn't come up quite a bit, but it is because if you ever ask like a help desk person how many times they have to reset the passwords for users, how many tickets that you have, it probably is quite a bit. So I've never called the Microsoft help desk to reset my password, ever. And I'm pretty sure they never get any of those calls from anyone. So the number of support tickets go down quite a bit. It's also an extra warning signal. So I'll tell you a story because I never have to enter my password. But I did a B2B connection with another organization that didn't have passwordless enabled or didn't have the same policies, but I was able to use my Microsoft account against theirs in a B2B connection. Well, as soon as I connected, it prompted me for a password, and it was for my Microsoft password. And I immediately was like, is this phishing, or what is this? Because I never have to enter in my password. So if you have passwordless deployed, anytime a user gets prompted for a password, they're immediately cautious. It turned out to be legitimate because it was the organization I was trying to connect to, but you know, just another extra warning signal for you. And then don't forget about single sign-on, which is also a very important part of passwordless strategy, right? You want to use an IDP like Azure Active Directory or Okta or Ping to federate those applications and then find a way to allow users to single sign-on, which is when they launch a browser, they launch into a web app, they don't have to enter in their passwords because it's federated with your identity provider. Here's kind of a plan to go through. I won't belabor this, but definitely start with a pilot, always in IT, right? Start with a pilot, and I'm sure everyone in your pilot will enjoy it. There are audit logs. If you pull on the sign-in, that you can pull audit logs from if you're using Azure AD to tell which method, and you can even see if they've enabled phone sign-in for passwordless authentication because it is an extra step in order to do that. So the users have to register the MFA, and then they have to enable phone sign-in within the authenticator to do the actual passwordless authentication. And then the final one there, disable your password for your MSA. Like if you have a Microsoft account, if you're using Xbox, or you have personal Windows computers, just go into the account and remove the password, and then you don't have one. You just use the authenticator to sign in. And it's great because like if I sign into a new Xbox, I don't have to enter in my 30-character password on my Xbox like controller. I just get a prompt, I hit OK, and I'm signed in. Here are some resources, contact information for me if you have any questions. And we're pretty much at time, so I'll stick around if you guys have any questions, but that's my presentation.